And we are live with a slightly different format today. So I'm joined by Ben from Hivemapper and Ryan from Blockworks Research. Before we do any introductions, maybe a quick, premise to this call. So I met Ben and Ryan recently in Singapore for Token 2049 and for Solana Breakpoint. There was a couple of interesting topics that we were discussing there. So one of them was an article that Ryan was working on, all to do with Hivemapper's burn mint equilibrium. So we'll go into that in a minute and what that means. And Ben, you and I were talking about I couldn't pronounce it at the time, but the bifurcation of the Hivemapper brand into Hivemapper and Beemaps. So I've since learned how to say it. So they're kind of the topics we'll cover. Anything else that you guys want to go into as well is absolutely fine, but that's kind of the premise. So maybe starting off with a couple of quick introductions. Ben, maybe you tell us about yourself, and then Ryan do the same.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Been working in the space 7-8 years. Been with the Hivemapper team for about 8 months now. Working on a lot of upgrades to the system, to our brand, everything you can imagine. So it's kind of baptism by fire. I jumped right in. Been playing around with DePIN for quite some time now, and it's just really an exciting project to be a part of.
Ryan here, manager of the Blockworks Research team. Macro investor for about 7 years, caught the crypto bug some years back. Recently made the jump to crypto full time, and haven't looked back and having a blast. A little bit about Blockworks Research. We have 17 analysts on the team, and we are in the trenches. We leave like no stone uncovered, have coverage across the industry, and live this thing 24/7. Big fans of Hivemapper and what you guys have done. I think we might have been the first research shop to cover you guys. So, excited to get into it.
Awesome. Thanks for that, guys. And I guess as well, a couple of disclaimers before we get into it. I guess firstly, it has the potential to be quite a bullish episode, this one. So if you're not a Hivemapper bull, maybe not the one for you. I know that I myself proclaimed Hivemapper bull. Ben, you kind of have to be because you work there. Ryan, you probably wouldn't have started covering it if you weren't at least interested in the topic. So that's the first one. Secondly, Ben, while you're not allowed to talk about anything token related, obviously because you're part of the team for legal reasons, Ryan, you and I can speculate away as much as we want if we want to as well. So none of this, I guess to tie into it, none of this is financial advice. Let's get into it then. So Ryan, first of all, I guess why you started covering Hivemapper would be a good place to start.
Yeah, totally. So, well, first and foremost, I was an early contributor to Hivemapper. I think like day one that you guys put the dash cams online, like somehow it came across my Twitter feed. I purchased a couple, and I've watched the project grow since inception, which has been really cool. I've seen the ups, the downs, I've seen the product improvements, I've seen like the accelerated pace of product development, and how like the team has just been all over the product in terms of the supply side. And then, I've watched the recent updates on the demand side, which have been super exciting. From like a research perspective, where Hivemapper sits within the DePIN space is super interesting. When I look at the DePIN space, there's a lot of competition on cost and cost alone. I think Hivemapper is fundamentally different in that the Honey token, unlike other DePIN projects, facilitates both a cost and product advantage, not just a cost advantage. So, when you think of the cost of a dash cam, like let's say 500 or so bucks, I'm not sure what the price is today, but let's call it 500. And you look at the cost that, it costs Google to put a, mapping car on the road, 500,000 bucks or whatever. For the same $10 million spend, you could have tens of thousands of, Hivemapper dash cams on the road collecting map imagery data versus just 20 for a Google Maps, right? So there's like a massive cost advantage there, and you see it in the API costs versus something like Google Platform. The estimates that we've done at Blockworks, more or less like 80 to 90% cost advantage there, depending on how you want to slice it. On the product side, like the thing that matters most for map data is frequency of updates, freshness, and that cost advantage that Hivemapper has creates a really interesting frequency advantage, right? Where, I think, the public statements by Ariel, they're mapping, places in Arizona like once per week and even higher frequencies, right? Whereas something like Google, they'll map these things like once every 18 months. And, the only reason you purchase map data is so like what's going on right now. Like what happened 5 years ago, what happened 18 months ago in like on the New York City street is irrelevant to me. Like there might be a bike lane there. Like it might be a one-way now. And if you're a logistics company and you're like concerned of like the optimal route, like you're not going to get there without real-time freshness, right? Like that's the ideal product. So that's like a really interesting wedge to a already very like multi-billion-dollar market that like Hivemapper has, that like you really don't see many other places in the DePIN space.
Awesome. So yeah, I like that approach, not just competing on price, but actually the DePIN approach is enabling a whole new product that wasn't necessarily possible to do before. And so maybe we can touch upon the article as well. So the focus was, it was titled Wen Burn, which is hinting at the burn mint equilibrium. I guess for those who don't know, as part of the tokenomics, there hopefully will become a point where the project is taking in more revenue in dollar terms than the dollar value of the tokens it's issuing to contributors. Is that a good description of the burn mint equilibrium?
Yeah, totally. Like those rewards are kind of meaningless if there isn't some sort of value capture there, right? So the way that you create a potential floor on the token or return value to those contributors is by you take the revenue that comes in on the demand side and use it to buy and burn a portion of that token supply, right? Or using a portion of that revenue to burn subsequent tokens, kind of acting similar to a buyback mechanism. It's not exactly the same, but it's the same effect. And there's variations of this model throughout the DePIN world. I think it's one of the, from first principles, like it's the one that makes sense. We're obviously early stage and like token projects are constantly like tweaking this model, but like by and large, like that's the core of it. And the Wen Burn piece really just looks at the DePIN space and says like, okay, this burn mint model is like all over the place. At what level of ARR do these various projects see burn or realize burn of their circulating token supply? And so just to like take a step back, like a second reason for why we like the Hivemapper project is because, again, unlike a lot of things in DePIN and just like crypto broadly, the Honey token model to date has empirically been extraordinarily capital efficient, right? So if you were to look in the DePIN space, you would see projects launching and within a month, 8% of their tokens are issued to the market, right? They have a fixed amount of tokens. They're never going to have any more of those tokens. And in month one, they've already burned, or they've distributed, 8, 15, 20% of those tokens. Huge number, right? In like stark contrast, what we've seen Hivemapper do is over the, roughly 2 years that this project's been in operation, about a little less than 10% of community awards have been issued, and Hivemapper has been able to realize meaningful burn on chain and has mapped, I think, and Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 28% of global unique road kilometers, which is to me like extraordinarily impressive, right? The way that the token model works, we don't have to get into it, but there's like this mechanism that extends the longevity of the token issuance to make sure that you never run out of rewards and that it's in line with the map progress that you're making. Those rewards are scheduled to be issued over the subsequent 25 years, right? And there's other like bells and whistles that can keep that like remint tokens along the way to make sure that contributors can keep sustainable rewards. So like, it's a really empirically, it is a very differentiated model than what exists on the market today and has been extraordinarily successful in that regard. And then the Wen Burn piece, like it's a pretty simple calculation, right? Like every one of these token rewards programs, you issue a new amount every week or every month to people for contributing to your network. And then as demand comes in, you burn some. And if the burn is greater than the issuance, like, you have net burn. And that's something that really no DePIN project has been able to achieve today. So when you look at Hivemapper, we like ask ourselves, like, okay, what level of ARR does Hivemapper need to effectively create this net burn? And it's only 13 million ARR, right? And the more capital inefficient that token program is, the higher that ARR number needs to be to create that net burn. So, like, we see this model, it's highly capital efficient, and that high capital efficiency enables a much lower threshold for net burn, which we think is really, really interesting.
So I guess a slightly different way of summing that up is the more tokens you issue, the more revenue you have to come in to basically cover the amount of value in dollar terms that you're issuing. And if you're being very capital efficient with the amount of tokens that you're issuing, then it actually takes less revenue to kind of to reach that burn mint equilibrium, or the net burn that you just mentioned. Maybe a weird question, Ryan, but what is the significance? Like, why does it matter to have that floor, as you put it, the price floor? What's the significance of actually reaching that burn mint equilibrium?
Theoretically, it should put some floor on the token price, which should make the supply side more sustainable, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing, like, what's the core of crypto? Like, why do we have tokens? Like, a lot of it is to incentivize behavior. And if you issue people this worthless asset that just asymptotes to zero, that has no value capture mechanism, like, your project probably asymptotes to zero as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important that there is some value accretive mechanism to these token supplies. I think it's critical for the long-term sustainability of a lot of these things.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what sets DePIN apart from a lot of other areas of crypto as well. Like, there's a fundamental business model behind a lot of these DePIN projects. The fact that they are generating revenue is kind of what sets DePIN apart. So I think it really is an important point, and that kind of probably segues into Ben line of questioning for you. The biggest part here is bringing clients on board. So. Right. Let's start with the bifurcation, because obviously that's something that the Hivemapper team, the Beemaps team thought would be a good idea, and will get you to that goal. So how did this come about? Why do you think it's going to be useful?
Yeah, so I think everyone arrives at this eventually. And it speaks to the maturation of the project right now, that the level of attention we need to place on essentially business-to-business data sales is that much greater than when the network was at its infancy, where we were trying to propagate a proof of concept, make sure that this system worked and was producing data that was usable in the industries that we were targeting. And so we've accelerated to the point now that we do have meaningful demand. We have 3 of the top 10 global online map providers purchasing data from us. But we're conflating 2 different talking points when addressing our audience. We're discussing the network effects and what Hivemapper network does as a function of how they participate in the cryptocurrency market. And then we have this other element, which is a little bit more obscure for people in the crypto industry, but map professionals would understand deeply. And that is the need and the desire for real-time street intelligence. And so rather than conflating the 2 audiences, being able to split those and give them intent, this Beemaps brand being directed towards the data purchasers and telling them about the elements that they care about is extraordinarily important, versus getting them into the rigmarole of, you know, what can blockchain do, the decentralized components. That's certainly a value add, but it's not a focal element that, when you're speaking to somebody like Here Technologies, that they truly care about how the sausage is made. They're looking at it and saying, well, is the data there? Is it high fidelity? And is the cost point at such a level that it is desirable for us, versus how we're competitively collecting this intelligence? And the answer on all fronts is yes. And so now we're kind of entering the next rung, which we'll talk about a little bit later, with the next gen devices, on scaling this and making sure that precision, efficiency come into the equation and make it that much better.
Okay. Well, why couldn't you have those conversations with clients? Forget about all the crypto stuff, the blockchain stuff. Let's just focus on, is the data there? The answer is yes. Have a look at our wonderful data. Why can't you have that conversation without the need for bifurcation? Like, what does the bifurcation enable from that regard?
Really, it's more about the audience split, I would say. When you're getting your community kind of like blended together, the business to business and then the business consumer side doesn't necessarily mesh well all the time. And like if you're inundating too much information that's irrelevant to one audience or the other, you're going to lose both. And so what you'll realize is there's already still a bit of a stigma with blockchain technology. We're not going to pretend like it's not there. I think everybody has been fighting this through the ups and downs of crypto in its nascent days. It's still in its nascent days. There's still a question of, you know, is this going to be a legitimate incursion into the Web 2 space? And so we don't want people getting caught in the crossfire of the politics of crypto, and instead dealing with us at a level and partnering with us at a level that is comfortable to them, that puts us in a category of the other Web 2 vendors and providers that they're used to speaking to.
So it could be just something as simple as, okay, if you've got a potential client, you want to send them to the Beemaps website where it's all about the data, whereas DePIN people coming who want to contribute, they want to see all about the token, they want to see the Explorer, and that's the Hivemapper side of things. So,
and at present, it's still kind of commingled. It's just you'll see some of those elements a little bit more minimized. And, you know, certainly like things when it pertains to the token really fall on the foundation side anyway. But in terms of how we're viewing network success and how that's championed, and then how that's perceived by the community of contributors, is going to be, again, just a different talk track than going to Here Technologies and saying, this is the fidelity of the data. This is how we're getting GPS accuracy. This is how we're dealing with drift. This is how we're plotting map features. That's going to go right over the head of some of our contributors. It's simply too far in the weeds. And so, again, it's just a really good idea to keep those audiences somewhat segmented so neither of them get confused.
Understood. Okay, no, that makes a ton of sense. And I don't want to go into this too much because Hivemapper, you guys had your AMA yesterday. There was a lot of stuff covered, including Ariel talking about the client side of things, what those profiles look like. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but maybe you could give us a quick overview in your own words of what does the future hold when it comes to onboarding clients? Who are these clients? What are the most exciting sectors that you guys are talking to at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities, and we'll be publishing kind of the full Q3 report where we dive into a little bit of how we're thinking about the next quarter heading into the next year. But, you know, we have onboarded 3 of the top 10, but we're working on the 4th. We're talking to automotive manufacturers. We're talking to major rideshare companies. These conversations will accelerate as we're able to get more coverage with higher frequency. And that's going to come when the next generation devices ship, which is really soon. But if you look at how impressive this is as a proof of concept, we've already accumulated like 28 million unique kilometers of street imagery every month. Like that's a lot. And when you see things like, I mean, just to put this into context on how important this data could be, we were looking at things like how the hurricane had wiped out roads in Asheville, North Carolina, and it had done so within a matter of 24 hours. And if you're thinking about road intelligence from the standpoint of logistics planning, emergency service planning, and things like that, it really just punctuates how this can not only be just good technology for the sake of improving logistics and efficiencies for, you know, supply chain, but it can also save lives. You know, we're getting to a point where self-driving cars are soon going to be here, and it's about increasing the threshold of safety, the number of collisions that happen on the road. Like having predictive and preventative technologies in place are a huge motivating factor for the automotive industry and the rideshare industry. And so you're going to actually hear safety as a functional talking point as we progress through this, even as we're talking about accelerating into things like commercial fleets with Beekeeper and some of the other things that we've teased out.
Amazing. And that's super exciting. I hadn't actually heard before today you mentioned top rideshare companies as well. So that's an interesting one to hear. I'm looping back actually, Ryan, something that you said the other day actually came to mind as we were talking all of this. Obviously, we're focusing on the revenues. We're talking about the clients that are getting onboarded, which is definitely a super, super important part of it. But actually, Ryan, you said something to me the other day offline, which I found quite interesting, which is that you think that sometimes too much emphasis is actually put on this. How much revenue are they generating right now? Why do you think that? Why is too much emphasis sometimes put on the revenues that DePINs are generating?
I think that each one of these DePINs, you really have to take them on a case-by-case basis. There are like sales processes that every single one of these things like needs to go through. If you're thinking, and even just in the crypto space broadly, right? Like, if you want to look at the revenues for a DEX, like that's super easy. It's available today. You can look and on DeFi Llama, you can see where the revenue is coming from. And like, it doesn't take retail a lot of friction to go from playing over on this DEX over here to go playing on this DEX over here. Like the friction's very, very low. I think for DePIN projects, there's like especially ones that are catering to enterprises, there is like a sales process, and enterprise buyers are very discerning. Like they need hand holding. They spend at least 6 months doing these things, especially when there's significant spend involved, which there is when these guys purchase map data, especially these big logistics companies, right? So, like, yeah, it's really exciting that we can see Hivemapper burn on chain, but like these qualitative updates that the team is pushing out there, like I think those are more important to look at, because they point to like an ongoing sales motion that, like, again, from the public information that we're hearing on the AMAs and on the Discord, like we know that the HDC cam provided a certain amount of value. And now we know that the B is going to provide more value, and enterprises likely want to see the proof of that. And then when B ships, they'll start to see that data come in, and that's going to like change the trajectory of that sales motion, right? So, you know, looking at the on-chain data, like you have to think of the nature of it. It's also very backward looking, but I'm like very much interested in this like forward looking reasoning around like the sales motion, like selling into these enterprise customers.
Yeah, 100%. It's actually, you touched on something I was speaking with Mike from GeoNet about the other day, which is that running a DePIN, you're not running a Web3 business alone. There's a Web2 side of it as well, where your clients are focused. And to your point, Ryan, whilst everything moves incredibly quickly in crypto, in the Web2 world, it does take quite a long time to build those relationships, the onboarding cycle, and then, yeah, as you put it, every industry, every business take case by case, because the onboarding cycle is slightly different for each one. So yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And just to again loop back around to the Wen Burn article, given the size of the potential market for Hivemapper's data, I think you concluded that at the current token price and issuance rate, it was 13 million ARR, so annual recurring revenue, to get there. That actually seems like a drop in the ocean compared with the overall size of the potential market that Hivemapper are going after anyway.
Yeah, the market's quite large. There's a market sizing's tough, right? There's no one way to do it. Like, look, there are, you know, some estimates say 20 billion. Geospatial is in the hundreds of billions. But let's like be conservative and like look at like where we have like facts and like be ultra conservative. Google Maps platform does about 10 billion, which with hundreds of thousands of customers, and that's like kind of like your bare minimum there. So, I mean, that's sizable. And given the value that something like Hivemapper provides, you know, to take a little bit of that TAM, I don't think it's too challenging.
100%. Well, I think that was sufficiently bullish on the market sizing front. I think we probably covered everything, guys. Before we wrap up, was there anything else? I would say quickly, if you want more information about what's to come with the B, the importance of the B, all that kind of stuff, go and listen to the Hivemapper AMA from yesterday. Hopefully, at some point soon, you guys, Ben, you're going to bring out something to do with the geolocation of the B.
So, somewhat controversial take, right? Like he's not using RTK, and that's called a bit of a stir. But Ariel's kind of outlined a bit of his reasoning behind that, but he's going to be putting together a little bit more of a full form documentation so that he can explain his rationale and what our results were, which in testing was rather remarkable in terms of dealing with things like urban canyons and still being able to maintain accurate positioning, which is very important. I also want to point out that there is a huge AI component here in the product that is not to be understated. And we often talk about these as just mapping machines, and it does collect great street imagery, but far more than that, this element of setting up a training module that can offload some of the mechanical elements of plotting map features is really big and really important that we started that early. The cost for training modules is accelerating. It's been really good for DePIN that got in early and are leveraging AI appropriately to kind of create these systems, but it's going to get far more difficult in the coming years. So this is one of those elements where being early was a huge cost advantage as well. So there are lots of rising tides right now. We're really excited for some of the synergies that are going to come out with, especially working with like Helium Mobile. We've talked a little bit about that and how there might be some just multi-DePIN, wins lifting us and moving us forward. So there's nothing but excitement in the future, and we understand that this is a long process. So our 5 to 10 year vision is still in the early days, and we're going to be fighting for every inch.
Yeah, 100%. And like I always like to remind people, it's been it's not even 2 years yet.
2 years. It's been
just 22, wasn't it? I think I got the first ones in my hand. So it's like what you guys have achieved in less than 2 years is just staggering. Like it's so definitely bright things to come as well. Cool. Should we call it a wrap there, guys? Thanks so much to both of you for coming on. Always a blast to speak. And hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Leo.